Hello, my name is Heiko Paulheim. I work at the University of Mannheim, and I present this paper, a knowledge graph for assessing aggressive tax planning strategies in the ISWC and USTRAC. And this has been joint work with my colleague Nico here at the Data and Web Science Group, with Niklas, Ageda, and Nikolaos, who are students at the University of Mannheim, and with Christopher Ludwig, who works for the ZEW, which is the European Center for Economic Research. In this paper, we look at tax planning strategies, and tax planning strategies have been all around the news. So there were all these files like LuxLeaks and the like, which revealed that multinational companies actually invest a lot of efforts to plan their taxes in a way that they are minimized and that they try to push profits back and forth in order to lower their overall tax rates. So to quickly distinguish these two terms, tax planning is a legal operation. So tax planning is something which you do when you run a multinational corporation. You try to move your profits to those countries which have low tax rates and thereby minimize your overall tax payment duties. The term aggressive tax planning refers to doing that to a large extent, but it's not a formally defined term. On the other hand side, tax evasion denotes an illegal activity. So tax evasion means that companies make wrong declarations in their statements in order to minimize their tax rates, but this is then based on misinformation and therefore an illegal activity. So the idea of this project was to create a knowledge graph of companies and their interrelations, like subsidiary relations, which is a parent-child relation, and then use this knowledge graph to find evidence for commonly known tax planning patterns. This is one use case. And the other one to also look into the graph if there are other anomalies and allow to analyze these anomalies in much more detail. This knowledge graph has several ingredients. So one of the main ingredients is GLIFE, the Global Legal Identifier Foundation, which provides public data on companies, their subsidiaries, and their legal forms. We use taxation information for the different countries provided by the OECD. We use more relevant country indicators provided by the World Bank, like GDP and the like. And finally, we also use Wikidata to have a common set of identifiers for cities and countries, and also to link the companies which exist in Wikidata. So from these four ingredients, we built an integrated knowledge graph, and you can also find all the code to create this knowledge graph on GitHub. So in the first place, GLIFE provides us with a set of CSV files. OECD and World Bank are queried for JSON data. And for Wikidata, in order to facilitate fast offline processing when building the graph and not putting a load on the endpoint by repetitively querying the graph, we first extract all the data we are interested in, like cities, companies, and countries, through Sparkle queries, store that data locally, and then process it further. Now, to interlink all these different sub-data sets, the companies in Wikidata as well as in LEI, they also use these LEI identifiers in Wikidata, so we can directly interlink them. Countries in all those data sets all use ISO codes, so we can also directly interlink the countries from the different data sources. Only for city, we need a manual matching process, so cities are manually matched or like automatically matched using zip codes and some fuzzy string matching. So this, in the end, gives us the matches for the cities in Wikidata as well as in companies in GLIFE. So overall, this data set then results in roughly 1.5 million companies, out of which we only find 21,000 in Wikidata. So this is really substantially larger. We have 95,000 cities extracted from the addresses in GLIFE, out of which we can interlink 47 to Wikidata, give or take a few. And finally, we also have these 183,000 subsidiary relations, like parent-child relations between the companies. And this is the data we need for our analysis. And most specifically, we also find pretty long chains, and this is what distinguishes our data set from other publicly available knowledge graphs. So for example, in Wikidata, you also have parent-child relations between companies, but they only go to a depth of 3, while we find chains up to a depth of 5. The only other data set that's publicly available that also has these long chains of subsidiaries is Yago, but Yago has that as at some orders of magnitude lower. So they have much less companies than the graph we extracted from Glyph and these other sources. So here's an example for such a long chain of subsidiaries. This is Morgan Stanley International, which is the ultimate parent entity that's located in the US. It has a subsidiary, which is also located in the US. And then there is a longer chain of other subsidiaries, most of them being located in the UK. But if you dig down long enough, so if you follow all this chain down to the last child, then this last child has its legal address in the Cayman Islands. And this is where tax planning comes in, and therefore we really need these long chains of subsidiary relations. This diagram here shows all the companies which have their headquarters, so where they actually run their operations, and a legal address in different countries. So every time you find a company which has a headquarter in one country and a legal address in another country, you draw one line from left to right. So you see on the left-hand side, you see all the places where the headquarters are. So US is quite big there, Great Britain, some European countries like France and Germany, there's Hong Kong, there's China. And on the right-hand side, you see the biggest bars are actually those which are these potential tax havens, like the Cayman Islands, the British Virgin Islands, Luxembourg, Bermuda, and so on. So you see the graph looks pretty different on the left and on the right, and you already see that this might be a first indicator for tax planning activities. Since our graph is knowledge graph following standard technology with RDF and also comes with a Sparkle endpoint, what we can do is once we know certain tax planning strategies, we can look at what is the pattern behind that strategy. We can formulate that in a Sparkle query and then directly retrieve a list of companies which make use of this tax planning strategy. One out of those is the so-called duck-rabbit construct. The name goes back to this optical illusion where you can both see a duck and a rabbit in the same image. So duck-rabbit constructs are constructs of multinational companies which have subdivisions in different countries, and each country considers this company as a company which should be taxed in the other state. So you have two states, state A and state B. State A says this company must pay its taxes in state B, and state B says this company must pay its taxes in state A. And in consequences, the company doesn't pay any tax. The company which made this pattern famous was Activision, a US game company, and we also found this Activision example when we ran this query in our graph, but we also find other companies who also use that particular pattern of tax planning. So what we wanted to do is we also wanted to look at what other anomalies are there in the graph. And since we have all that data, we can, for example, look at what are the countries where there are the most companies per inhabitants or the most companies per 1 million US dollars in GDP. And this is what is shown in these tables. So the upper part shows companies per population. So for example, in Liechtenstein, there is one company per 3 inhabitants, which is already quite a lot. And you see most of those countries which show up in this upper part of the table are like these countries you would expect there, like the Cayman Islands and so on. But there is also Denmark, and this is something that that actually was also a surprise to the domain experts which were involved in this project. And so we found that actually something must be rotten in the state of Denmark. So we digged a bit deeper. And actually, if you look for that on the web, you actually find some consulting companies who offer services in planning planning your taxes via some special constructs with Danish holding companies. So actually, this was a pattern which the domain experts in the project were not aware of to begin with. Our knowledge graph is also directly linked to Wikidata. And this also allows us to run analyses which use data both from our graph, from the text graph, as well as from Wikidata. And we can use federated Sparkle queries for that. So on this slide, you see an example here. We wanted to look at cities which have a high density of companies per square kilometer. So in our graph, we do not have the area of a city, so we have to use that from Wikidata. And then we can count how many companies we have in a particular city using our knowledge graph, use the area of those cities from Wikidata, and then divide one by the other to compute the density. And we can do that in one single federated query. Once we do that, we find some interesting spots on the planet. So for example, here you see 4 addresses which have a very high concentration of companies who have their address at these places. So on the left upper corner, you see this building 1209 Orange Street in Wilmington, Delaware. And this small building is actually the address of almost 15,000 companies, which we have in our graph, which is due to the open world assumption even lower than the actual number of companies whose address is the 1209 Orange Street in Wilmington. So these 2 upper examples, both in Delaware, they also became famous as the Delaware loophole, which is some special tax legislation practice in Delaware in the US. And on the bottom side, you see one house in the United Kingdom, which also has a very high concentration of companies, so more than 2,000 companies residing in this one small building. And on the bottom right, you see one of these famous letterbox houses in the Cayman Islands. So if you want to play around with this data set, run your own analyses or run some graph analytics on the data set, we offer you a linked data endpoint, we offer you a Sparkle endpoint, and we also offer dump downloads of the entire data set so that you can run your own offline analysis if that's what you like to do. So you're invited to go to this address here, text graph informatik uni Mannheim TE, and play around with the data set. There is example Sparkle queries, there is entry points to this linked data browser, and so on. So summarizing what we've shown with this paper is that we can build this large knowledge graph of companies and their relations and some background information using multiple sources. We have shown that we can query this graph for tax planning patterns which are already known, so which already exist in the literature and have been discovered. But we can also show that we can discover new anomalies in the graph, like this Denmark issue, as well as run federated querying if you are interested in analyses which incorporate other external data from Wikidata. So current limitations of this is, first of all, the coverage of GLIFE itself. So it's one of the largest open databases with company data. They have roughly 1.5 million companies. But still, if we step away from open data, there is other databases which are substantially larger, like Orbis, for example, has around 40 million companies in it. So you can see that the coverage of that data set can still be improved. One stepping stone here is that in some countries, the regulations of publishing this company data differs, and especially some countries have different open data policies. So in some of the European countries, we get a lot of this company data as open data. In other countries, it's different. Recency is only an issue. So one idea was to scrape recent news from Reuters or from Financial Times and incorporate these recent news, for example, on acquisition and mergers in the graph. And finally, also increase the data richness. So enrich the data about the companies, like number of employees and turnover and how much money is actually shifted from A to B. So this closes my presentation. I hope you enjoyed. Thanks once again for listening, and also thank you to all of the people who were involved in this project.